Hey there, podcast listeners. This is Corbett Lunsford, your host. This special episode of the Building Performance Podcast is from last year's Fall Fast Track, which is my annual 6-week mastermind course with people all over the world, all about profiting from home performance. If you'd like to learn more and pre-register for free, you can do that at homeperformance.training. Enjoy.
A rising tide lifts all boats. Fall Fast Track.
This week in Rocking the Installation, we are talking with the one and only Matt Reisinger, who is a builder and blogger. That's how he likes to be described, although he's really incredibly important. He's the founder of Reisinger Homes in Austin, Texas. He's got a huge YouTube following. He takes it more seriously and has been doing it longer than I have. Matt, thank you so much for being on the program.
Yeah, definitely, Corbett.
What, kind of in a nutshell, do you see going wrong out there when people take ideas from building science and then they try to put it into practice, but they fail?
Ooh, good question, Corbett. I think number one is that people really need to remember that a building science background is important before they get into the nitty-gritty of particular products and installs, because what's right for Texas is not necessarily what's right for the North, for instance. And especially as we talk about the main issues with buildings failing, which is really water. Water, even though it's following the same physics, whether you're in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, or Austin, Texas, the climate is totally different. And so the way that we build in Austin needs to be vetted with a really good building science background. I actually have a good story on this. I've got an architect I work with who has a client that wants to build his own house, and they just moved from a northern climate, and they were talking about putting a vapor barrier on the inside of the wall cavity, and I said, gosh, this client really needs some building science background to know that in our hot, humid climate, that is a really bad idea. And the client seemed like they knew what they were talking about to the architect. Oh, are you going to use such and such insulation, and we're going to do this outsolation and this rain screen, and so they had some technical knowledge and knew some jargon from the building science world, but they really didn't have a solid foundation of understanding, hey, if I do this out of sequence or out of order, I'm gonna cause some catastrophes in the future. And so I think when it comes to the installation and really rocking that installation, you got to start with a really good education first, and then get into the minutia of particular products and why this small change is going to make a big difference on your house.
And how do you recommend, as someone who I'm sure, you are obviously an expert in your field now, but you and I both started out not knowing enough, and so we had to fake it till we make it. So how, for somebody who is still in the stage where they're collecting their expertise and they haven't quite gotten to that point that you're at, what would you recommend to err on the side of in all cases before they actually do start knowing exactly what's going on?
I would say err on the side of tradition in some respects, or err on the side of what's worked for a longer period of time in your climate zone, and be cautious about being the pioneer on new products and new techniques. That's really the approach that I've taken as I've frankly been relatively new to building in Texas. I've only built in Texas for 10 years, and I was that Yankee builder building in the Northeast and in the Pacific Northwest for 10 years before moving to Texas. I had to kind of relearn to build in a hot, humid climate. So, buying a copy of Stebrick's Builder's Guide to the Climate Zone was a huge one for me. And really studying, okay, why did I do this in this climate zone, and why does that not work in that climate zone? Thinking about those things critically when you start with them, and then also being a little product neutral. There's manufacturers that have very large marketing budgets to tell you that their product is the best and that their newfangled invention is going to be fantastic. But ultimately, buildings are meant to be reliable for more than just a few years or a few decades. We want our buildings to be reliable for a few hundred years ultimately. And so we need to really think about how buildings are going to react in the long term and not just the short term.
So as somebody who relies on tradition or would err on the side of tradition, in the one place in the country where they actually made some of the new performance testing that's going to be code everywhere at some point.
Mm-hmm.
You were the guinea pig in Austin, right? They had duct testing mandated earlier than any place else in the country. So with the tightness being different now than the way that we used to build 50 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
how do you use the tradition, but also inform it with the fact that we're actually not building the same way as we used to at all?
Yeah, I guess I need to qualify when I say tradition. I'm not necessarily saying we need to build them like we did 50 years ago. I'm certainly not saying that. But I am saying let's be cautious about brand new products that are promising a certain level of performance when there's something in the back of your mind that goes, I don't know, there's just something about this that I'm not sure it's right. That's where I think that building science education and background comes in.
Absolutely.
It's almost your ninja sense saying, I don't know. I know this is being used a lot, or this is getting advertised heavily, but there's just something about it, I don't know, that doesn't quite jive with me. And so, as you're thinking about the four main envelope barriers on your house, when we're talking about bulk water, vapor, airflow, and thermal, the order of those things is particularly important. And so ultimately, for me, one of the things that I've spent a ton of time talking about on my blog is waterproofing. And I work with all kinds of different buildings, from very traditional looking buildings to very ultra modern buildings. And that getting that waterproofing right is way more important than getting the insulation right. And then getting the vapor barrier correct is frankly more important than air sealing. Getting the air barrier right is more important in some respects than the vapor or thermal. So, we need to really get the big things right first on our buildings, and then get into the minutia and the nitty gritty.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think everyone wants to start in building science talking about insulation and efficiency, when ultimately we should be talking about durability first, and then insulation and efficiency.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. I think that energy efficiency can be considered a side effect of all the things that you're wrapping into your houses. So
agreed.
Now you're building it says that you build for architects in site. Is that true, that you do all just custom jobs?
100% custom for a myriad of different architects. We like to refer to ourselves as architects builders. So we work with some architects that have a very large building science background, and some that have very little building science background, and some buildings that are crazy efficient, and others that are frankly not all that efficient but are super architecturally significant, and we think are going to be around a long time because people are going to care for them because they're beautiful, not necessarily because they're the latest super efficient house.
Right.
And then with every build that we get into, we try to get in as early as we can, so that we can help educate both our clients, our consultants, our architects, whomever, on some of the things that really are going to make a difference in that building long term. And like I said, durability is a huge one for us. We build a lot of buildings with no overhangs and very modern exteriors, and there's a lot of that being done the wrong way around the country. And frankly, I think with the kind of modern renaissance of very modern buildings, within about 10 years, we're going to see some pretty serious building failures happen because a lot of those buildings are not getting built correctly.
Now, when you work with subcontractors, I imagine that you share them with other builders who are not quite as careful. Is that right?
Generally speaking, yes. When we're talking about rocking the installation, though, it's all about, number one, finding the right sub, and number two, training that sub. The Japanese have a management technique that they call poka-yoka, which basically means that anybody in the manufacturing process, let's say at Toyota, if they see a problem, they can hit a red button that stops the entire line, so that we don't send that problem on down the line for someone else to deal with. And that's one of the things that I've done a great job in training my trades, is even if they don't know how to do something, even the lowest man of the crew can go, something's not right here, and they'll hit the proverbial stop button. I had a good example of this. about a couple months ago, I was on a job site towards the end of the day. No one else was on the job except for a two-man cornice crew, which is an exterior siding crew. And these guys didn't speak a ton of English. They were the lowest paid guys in the crew. The head guys had already left. It was like 5 o'clock, and they're in the back of the house. This is a house that had some exterior continuous insulation, and there's a vent that came through the wall, and it was going to terminate on the outside. And the guy said, "Hey, there's something that's not right here," in kind of some broken English. And sure enough, they were missing their quick flash boot on there. And so those guys didn't know what the problem was. They didn't know how to fix it. They didn't know where to get the quick flash boot. But they knew they'd been on enough of my houses, and they'd seen us do enough rain screen before. They knew that there was some piece of flashing that was missing. And that was a huge win for me, that even the $10 an hour guy on the crew, the lowest paid laborer who's handing the siding up to the guy who's actually doing the work, can pull me aside and go, "Hey, there's a problem here. What do? We need to stop until we get this fixed." And I think that example is one that really shows the value in training your subcontractors and using them over and over, not taking the lowest bidder, really thinking critically about the install and how do we train our guys to be the install right. And now I've got a crew of frame carpenters that do a ton of work for me. They do all my framing, they do all my exterior trim and cornice, and they also do all my weatherization. And by weatherization, I'm saying weather barrier, my house wrap, my peel and stick, everything that's on the outside of the house to make sure water doesn't get in. And man, I've got ninjas out there that are crawling around my houses that really know what it is that they need to do. And if they come across a problem, they know to press the timeout button. That's huge for me.
That is a big deal. Now, obviously, it sounds, I mean, from what you're describing, it sounds like, oh, you just tell people, "Hey, I really want to know if anything goes wrong so that we can fix it. And I'm a nice guy. I'm not going to be mad. Like, let's go ahead and stop the process." Do they get pressure, though, from their bosses who are not being paid by the hour to just like, we're getting a project fee for this? Like, how do you work it out with the company at large to make sure that it's okay that the lowest paid guy, who is an hourly worker, is going to be able to like call quits on everything?
Yeah, I mean, we're getting into a bigger discussion here, Corbett, than your audience may or may not have time for. But I mean, ultimately, what it means is, as a company, there's been multiple times when we've said the priorities on the project are project, client, architect, builder, and the client, frankly, the project comes before the client comes before the architect, and we're last. And sometimes that means that our profit is on the line. And a mistake in a building, I've found that 5 years later, if I make a mistake, I'm going to get called back and I'm going to have to pay for that. So I'd rather lose $2,500 this month as a company, or don't make the $2,500 that I could have, let's say, and do something right and have that stoppage of work for a day or whatever it is, than proceed forward with a problem. And so that's something that I've trained my subs on, to say, okay, I know you bid this for me, but I've got a contingency budget on this, and if we come across something that doesn't look right or doesn't look like it's in your bid, I want you to tell me so that you and I can be fair with one another and say, hey, we had to stop for a day, or we had to go home at 3 o'clock when we could have worked a full day because you're missing that flashing. And I'm going to pay for that time. And if it means it comes out of my profit, it does. And as a result, over the years, I've gotten a lot better at really putting a correct contingency on my jobs to account for that. Whereas 5 years ago, it was maybe coming out of my profit more often. Today, on new construction jobs, I'm putting a 5% contingency on most of my new construction. Remember, these are pretty detailed architect-driven plans with also fairly relatively high budgets. And on remodels, I'm doing between 10 and 20% contingency, because I need to make sure there's money in there to have a job done correctly and right, even if we didn't know what we were getting into to begin with.
Yeah. And so it sounds like even though now you've figured out the money side, you're so smart at the public relations side of things with both your YouTube channel and your blogging and writing for the Journal of Light Construction.
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to leverage the things that go wrong to both impress your potential clients for the future and spook your competition that, oh my gosh, this guy really is taking it seriously?
I don't know about spooking the competition, but what it has led is to me is I'm 10 years in business, and I regularly compete against builders that have been doing this for 30 years now. And frankly, I'm competing on the more upper end projects, and I have the ability to say, that budget or that job is probably not a good fit for my company. We don't do projects below X dollar figure, and so it allows me to be a little bit picky. And on the other hand, if I get a project in that I think is really a jewel, I finished a project and we did a bunch of videos on a perfect wall house. That was a pretty low budget. I hardly had any profit margin on the job, but it was a super awesome all exterior insulation job using Building Science Corporation's perfect wall strategy. So I had no inside insulation. It allowed us to do no drywall on the inside of the house. A 3-zone mini split system to heat and cool it. A HERS rating of like 37 without any renewables. Just a super cool project, both from an architecture and a building science perspective.
And it's a beautiful looking house too. For the listeners, I will link to that video in the page where you got this podcast.
And the same crew that's framing that job, which was a pretty modest budget, is then framing a couple $1 million house for me the next week. And that's one thing that I really love about using the same crew, the same guys, making sure they're taken care of, that they don't lose money on my jobs, that they always maintain profitability. You're not going to get anywhere as a builder by screwing your subs or by taking the lowest bidder. You really need to spend the time and the effort to find people that have integrity, find people that are trainable, that will charge you a reasonable cost for good work, and then you just need to keep them busy and build your business around that. And now I've got a team of subcontractors that's loyal to me because I was loyal to them during the downturn. And I've grown my company hugely over the course of the last 10 years. And I've just got a great team of super loyal guys that have really maintained their pricing, even though our Austin market is fairly hot and is fairly busy. I still have pretty reasonable pricing compared to what a lot of builders are getting out there today. And I'm doing that with some of the highest levels of quality in Texas. So I'm not trying to brag. I'm just saying that if we think critically about this and we really maintain high standards, that the business will come. And it's taken me time. Don't get me wrong. I didn't make a lot of money the first 2 to 4 years I was in business, but I did maintain a impeccable reputation, and for quality and for integrity and for really doing things right. And now that's really paying great dividends for me.
Yeah, it clearly gets around. So I'm curious specifically with your framers, because I find that framers are some of the hardest people to get on board, since they're just not thinking about their process as part of the building performance necessarily.
Yeah.
How did you teach? First of all, do you do a framing plan? And secondly, how specifically did you convince the framers to use the right amount of wood, meaning not too much, and kind of how the workflow fits into everything else that goes into one of your houses?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think framing in particular is one phase that takes a long time to really develop that relationship and find the right person. And I went through quite a few guys that did, good work for me, but weren't necessarily the best long-term fit. And now I've been using the same crew for 5 or 6 years, and they've been a great fit. So I've got an owner of the company who is teachable and maintains a very high skill crew. And over the years, I've really found that they were open and willing to talk to me about the way they did things, and were open to making those small changes that I was looking for. And for me, they knew that I was, before long, they really figured out that I was going to be their bread and butter, and they were willing to make those changes. And I think there is a lack of commitment from builders in America because we have such a production builder mindset that goes for the cheapest price, and that loyalty can be fleeting. And so, if you can find a frame carpenter that you like and that is teachable, if you show that loyalty, then if you find the right guy, they will return that by giving you what you're looking for, which is ultimately a very high performance build within a budget that's predictable.
Now, you brought up one last thing that I'd like to have you touch on is you brought up the Toyota and the concept of like every person within the production line is very important. They also have a concept for continual improvement. And I was wondering, as somebody who's been doing this for 10 years, how do you use that? Like, what are you refining at this point now that you've got it really dialed in on both the installation and on the PR and letting people know what you're doing sides?
Yeah, the Japanese call that Kaizen, and it's really just that continuous improvement. On the kind of American version of that, there's a concept called lean construction that if you're not familiar with, there's a Lean Construction Institute that's very good, and they have some great, I went to their national conference a year or two ago and learned a ton, but the American version of that is every worker gives you a free brain. And that's to say, look, everybody has probably an idea that can make things better if you'll take the time to listen and think about that and have meetings on a regular basis to say, how can we do this better? And how can we do this better the next time around? And I think for an organization like ours, we're mid-sized. I'm not a particularly large builder. I have 5 project managers. We build roughly 6 to 8 projects at any one given time. And then I am a little bit oddball in that I have 7 carpenters on staff. And by carpenters, I mean finish carpenters, not framing carpenters. So we self-perform most of the interior finish work on our houses, with the exception of cabinetry. We don't typically do cabinets. And so I've got a great mix of some super smart project managers that I've really hired because they had really good critical and logical thinking skills, and I test for that as I interview people and as I meet people, so that I can really, I'm not so much worried about their experience. I want them to be able to think critically about how to get from point A to point B and get through the challenges that get there. And that's really that philosophy of Kaizen and continuous improvement. It starts with the top and top person saying, we want the next house to be better. We want, let's say if we blew a 3 ACH50 and we met the new code, how do we get down to a 2? What's it going to take? How can we reduce our air infiltration by 50%? I mean, that's a quest I've been on for years now, is trying to get all my houses below 1 ACH50. And frankly, I'm not there yet, but I've got a lot of guys working on it and thinking about it and talking about it. And for us, every house is different because we've got different architects. And so on one house, I may have an architect who's really bought off and is going to get really high performance glass and super tight casement windows from Marvin, or whatever it happens to be. And then another house, I've got custom iron exterior windows and doors that are terrible from a performance standpoint, but they'll still be around for your grandchildren to replace the glass on it and scrape and paint someday. So it's a real dichotomy in my business.
Awesome. Matt, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely, Corbett. I really appreciate having me on the show. And if you've not seen my YouTube channel, I'd love to have you come check it out sometime. It's youtube.com/Matt Reisinger, RISINGER.
You heard the man. So you go check out and subscribe to his YouTube channel. Go to his blog at mattreisinger.com. Matt Reisinger is the builder and blogger who is the founder of Reisinger Homes in Austin, Texas. You've been listening to a special edition of the Building Performance Podcast. Tune in next time.
A rising tide lifts all boats. Fall fast track.